Greetings, sports fans. ASMR Sports back to you with a special presentation. A number of people have been asking about my thoughts on this whole Logan Paul Pokémon situation that, has been pretty big news in the hobby. And I had actually planned to, do some content on it. So I decided just to do a whole video on it, and I'm on my setup that I use for live streaming, actually using a slide presentation today to gather up just a bunch of photos and information, which I've been wanting to try to make videos using a slideshow software. I use Keynote, which is an Apple program for that. So I've been investigating how to do that. I think I've got it figured out, but we'll find out. Alright, so let's just dive right in. So some time ago, mainstream media picked up on a situation in the sports, it's not sports cards, it's Pokemon, but in the collectible cards industry involving Logan Paul and a case of, it's really windy here, so you're going to hear that in the background, but a case of first edition Pokemon booster boxes, of which there appear to be actually no other existing examples of. There are sealed first edition Pokemon booster boxes out there, and we'll look at those in a second, but or one of those. But the case of the sealed case of those boxes that Logan purported to have bought would have been the only one in existence. However, to cut to the chase, it was discovered that what Logan Paul purchased was in fact not a legitimate item, and that's a pretty big deal when somebody has spent $3.5 million on that item. So let's take a look at what has transpired kind of since the inception of this situation. So a long time ago in a planet far, far away, namely end of March 2021, a very interesting item you see before you was sold on eBay out of Canada. As you can see, this is a case purporting to be a case of Pokemon base set first edition. The sale price of this item was $72,549 US, and the price reflects a very steep discount on what the value of this item would be if it were in fact a legitimate excuse me, a legitimate case of 6 sealed boxes of Pokemon first edition, right? So this is a individual box of what is supposed to have been inside that case we just looked at. It's a Pokemon first edition booster box. You can see the first edition printing on the bottom right of the top of the box, and that distinguishes it from other Pokemon, not first edition, but first run Pokemon boxes that don't have that first edition printing stamp on it. So these are significantly more valuable than other first run Pokemon boxes. And by the way, disclaimer here, I am not an expert on Pokemon by any stretch. I basically know what I've read recently from this. So I know I have some Pokemon fans on the channel, and I apologize if I missed anything. I admit to it. I don't claim to be an expert, but I'll tell you what I know and have learned. Boy, it really sounds like there's a blizzard going on out there. It is very windy out where I am. But in any event, so this is, there's supposed to be 6 of these in that case, and again, you know, there are, I don't know, not a lot. I don't know, there's probably like maybe a few dozen of these known to exist in sealed box format, so to have a case of them would be quite something. So anyways, the low price, $72,000 for an entire case when boxes of this stuff are selling for $30,000 was, you know, an indication that the marketplace did not see this as very credible. There's lots of things that are sold on eBay that are clearly, you know, bad, especially in the sealed, you know, hobby market. So, you know, this was sort of kind of problem number one. So the eBay item has a bit of a story, right? Okay, so originally the winner of the auction that I had the screenshot of before, I'll just go up this one. The winner of this auction was PSA Pikachu, who, rather than complete the sale on eBay, contacted the seller, and they agreed to complete the sale off of eBay, so the seller wouldn't pay fees, and presumably so the buyer could, you know, get some further assurances about the legitimacy of the box. So they sort of canceled the eBay transaction, had some correspondence, and the buyer, PSA Pikachu, asked, you know, to be able to fly to Canada to see the box before paying, which is, you know, pretty reasonable request, particularly if PSA Pikachu is going to cover the expense of that travel and, you know, bring the money with him to pay. But the seller would not agree to that, so basically the parties just canceled the deal. After that, a gentleman, actually I think it was this guy Mealy Pops, who is, well, Mealy Pops, I actually have a typo there, it says Mealy Poppos. There's going to be typos in this, that's just all there is to it. I just did this very quickly so I could have something for you guys to look at while I ramble, but Jamil Mohammed is the owner of a large card shop called Mealy Pops. It's in the United States, I can't remember exactly where, but I want to say it's in the Midwest somewhere, like maybe Illinois or something like that, but anyways, Mealy Pops, I think, so they're said to have brokered the deal between the original seller from that eBay auction and a group of folks, including Card Kahuna, this guy named Jacob Gabe, and Mealy Pops, the shop, right? So basically, Mealy Pops, I think what it is, brokered the transaction. They found the seller, then they got Jacob Gabe involved to bring in some capital to buy it, and then Mealy Pops took a cut of the price once that item was then later sold. So I assume Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops got the case for roughly what it sold for on the eBay auction, which is like $70,000, right? So they, I think, probably had a deal where probably Jacob Gabe put most of the money up, and then they, you know, split the proceeds from a future sale along the lines of whatever, you know, ended up being. So anyways, these one of these two guys, I've read that it was Jamil Mohammed, took the case, as one reasonably should, to get authenticated by Baseball Card Exchange, which is the, you know, gold gold standard in authenticating the sealed status and legitimate existence of cases, boxes, and packs of both sports cards and other types of cards like non-sports cards, Star Wars cards and things like that. Now, much has been made of this, and we'll talk about this a little later, but much has been made of the fact that BBCE has not really done a ton of authentication of of things related to Pokemon, and there's a reason for that, namely that BBCE, as a matter of policy, does not authenticate factory sealed boxes. So if you have a box of 2018 Topps Update baseball cards, it is factory sealed by Topps, and you cannot send that in to BBCE. They will not wrap it, they will not authenticate it, they will not do anything with it. There are various reasons for that, and actually it's funny. It's funny timing, but BBC, 2 months ago, announced that they were actually going to start wrapping factory wrapped products, like what I'm talking about, which would then, basically allow them to wrap any factory wrapped Pokemon booster box. So in any event, the fact that they didn't do that, or they haven't done that to date, means that they haven't really seen a lot of Pokemon stuff. And if I'm not mistaken, I've read, and I don't know if this is accurate, but I've read that the case in question here was the first, at least the first, first edition or first run Pokemon booster box that BBCE had ever authenticated. So that's kind of telling about their lack of, knowledge. I mean, if you've authenticated, 20 cases of 1986 Fleer basketball, a lot of the kind of telltale signs that, have been indicators of a bad case over the years. If you have not done that level of looking at a particular kind of case, then you're not going to have that kind of experience. Now, I will say, BBCE has authenticated many many sports cases, and wrapped the entire case as authentic. And a lot of those cases are quite similar to the Pokemon cases in that they use sort of a similar kind of labeling on the exterior of the case. The tape is generally a similar tape. The companies each have their own kind of watermark on that tape, but the tape, the sort of quality of the tape and its reaction to the cardboard that it sits on, is going to be probably fairly common amongst the sports and non-sports cases that are produced. Let's not forget that Panini makes many non-sports products, and as does like Upper Deck, and so presumably BBCE has wrapped quite a few sealed cases, and has a list of things that they look for, and we'll talk about that a little bit once we go over the part where BBC reviews this case after they wrapped it. Okay, so in any event, so Cartoon and Mealy Pops get the case authenticated by BBCE. BBC says it's good and they wrap it. Then Cartoon and Mealy Pops sell the case to this guy Shine 50, whose real name is Matt Allen, for $2.7 million. And Matt Allen, I think, is actually a pretty good friend of Logan Paul. So, he probably bought it knowing that Logan was going to be interested in it, and that he could flip it relatively, quickly and easily once he got it. So then Matt Allen sells the case to Logan Paul for $3.5 million. And Logan starts kind of posting about it in December. There's my stomach. This is actually Logan with a picture of his 5 sealed boxes of Pokemon First Edition, which he was hoping to add, the 6 boxes in that case he bought to these, but no such luck. So anyways, he buys this, so Logan Paul buys this case for $3.5 million. And soon thereafter, people who are collectors in the Pokemon card world start kind of raising concerns. There's this article on PokeBeach that we'll look at some of the evidence they raised, but this was kind of like the most, I think, troublesome and thorough examination of the issues and the problems with this case. And this was, very end of December. So this sort of kicked off and kind of like, it crystallized, I think, what a lot of people were saying were concerns that they had with this case. And we knew there were issues that people in the community had with this case going way back to like March or April of 2021 when it was sold on eBay for a very low figure that suggested that lots of people were not willing to, make a gamble on, because, if you thought this thing was real, that $72,000 for 6 sealed boxes in the only sealed case of this stuff is a gigantic steal. It was then, it is even more so now. And, that just tells you that a lot of people did have concerns about this when it was listed on eBay. So, people start writing about it. And, the evidence that PokeBeach puts out there is all, it's relatively clear. Basically, they say, if you look over here, this is a label on a legitimate case of Pokemon. It gets faded because the type of printer that's used to make these labels, which are very common for shipping labels, and for labeling cases, like Panini uses these kinds of labels a lot. They're called thermal printer labels. I have a thermal printer label printer, and if you've ever ordered anything from hotcardboard.com, you've gotten a shipping label that I made using that printer. So, this is pretty commonly known technology. Over here, I think you can see my cursor. Over here is the label that went on the Logan Paul case, and you can see that the kind of authentic one is very faded. This one is either not faded or it's printed from a different kind of printer than a thermal printer, and it just does not have any kind of fading. It's almost like it's ink rather than thermal imaging. So, actually thermal imaging is not thermal printing is really the term I mean, but so anyways, that was a pretty big red flag. There were some other stuff they raised, like the barcode was not the right barcode if it is the same as other first edition boxes. Or actually, I think they didn't even have like a first edition case like example to work from, because like no one's ever seen one. They were comparing what was on the Logan Paul case, which is a first edition case, to cases that were cases of like first run Pokemon boosters, not first edition but first run. So like the first edition of that product, but not the first edition special first printing. So anyways, some of this was kind of extrapolated, so it wasn't like 100% sure that the claims made here necessarily apply to this particular case, but it was highly suggestive, we'll say. So these are the kinds of things that were raised about the case, and then, basically since this PokeBeach article came out, everybody and their mom has been saying, oh boy, that case that Logan Paul got is probably, fake, and Baseball Card Exchange really effed it up, and, it's going to be a huge, huge thing when they find out it's fake, and so the hobby just sort of, kind of went into overdrive on coverage and discussion about this issue. And everybody, was just sort of asking, well, what is in that case? And that was the question that was answered just a few days ago. This is the actual case. It's wrapped by Baseball Card Exchange. That's Logan Paul's hand there. This is from his Twitter feed. So Logan Paul decided he had to get an answer, so he flew to Chicago on his private jet. By the way, one time I looked into how much private jet flights cost. If you have your own private jet, it's quite a bit cheaper to, like on a per flight basis, if you fly a lot. But if you're an average person and you want to fly in a private jet, basically, there's a few factors, but basically, like I'm in the middle of the country, I could get anywhere probably in the continental United States for probably about $30,000 per leg. So if it was a round trip, it'd cost me $60,000, and that would probably be like one of the cheaper planes you could get, maybe like a 4-seater or a 5-seater. Anyways, I thought I'd throw that in there because I was like thinking, how much is Logan Paul spending on this fiasco? And then the other thing I also wonder is like, how much Logan Paul made from this fiasco, because the video that I'm about to show you clips from, or images or screenshots from, already has like over 4 million views, which I think is like, I think that translates to, give or take, like about, $430,000 in ad revenue. I think I'm doing that math right. But he could easily, by, the end of this, make more on the ad revenue from that one video than he, would have gained from buying and owning this case and, having an appreciated value. So I'm not feeling too sorry for Logan Paul. Also, that guy's kind of a, I don't know. I don't want to offend any Logan Paul fans, but I just think he's kind of the, Kim Kardashian, like totally talentless media whore that, gets a lot of money for not a lot of talent. But I mean, you could also say, well, he knows how to make content, he knows how to do production, get that content produced, and he knows how to sell it, so maybe that's his talent and he should get rewarded for that. Okay, fine, I accept it. No, I don't. I hate him. All right, here we go. So Logan Paul flies to Chicago to meet up with Steve Hart, the owner of BBCE, who does all of the authentications they do. There's no authentication, even if you send in, as I do, a $15 box of 88 Donruss baseball cards. Like, he's the one who authenticates that, he's the one who authenticates this, and he's the one who authenticates the 86 Fleer basketball cases that come in. So he's the guy. So anyways, they get in a room with Steve Hart, and they open up the case, and they're gonna look inside and see what they see. So they open up this case, and hey, it looks like there's Pokemon boxes, and like right when they open this, everyone's like, oh yes, it's good news. But then like 2 seconds later, like, oh wait a minute, why are these boxes kind of puffy? Like, they seem like they're overfilled. They have something too thick in them. And they have, if I can use my mouse here, over like just off video here, they have like a unprotected, legitimate box of first edition Pokemon that's worth $430,000. So they can compare like what it looks like and feels like to the things that come out of this, and it's just sitting over here, and they're just like handling it with their bare hands. It's not like in a case or anything. You see Logan Paul puts these things in acrylic cases, which is a very smart idea. But they have one that's not in an acrylic case. It's just sitting out here. And then there's a freaking glass of wine fucking sitting here. And if you watch this video, this is easy to find. Just search. I search for Logan Paul Pokemon, and it's like the first video. He's got a glass of wine, and then later, they open one of the boxes, and they find out there's a bunch of GI Joe cards in. And the guy who's sitting over here opens a box, and he kind of like throws it over here, which is where that real $430,000 box of Pokemon cards is sitting. There's a glass of wine here. I'm just like, Jesus, you frickin' people, you deserve to lose. Although we'll find out later they did not lose. Anyway, so this was the big reveal. To find out there's a bunch of GI Joe cards, which actually aren't too bad. They've come up a little bit in value. Probably about $50 a box for GI Joe cards. But that's a little shy of 3.5 million. But anyways, that's what's in there, and all the while, Logan Paul's making hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on that video, just because people, and he's in the news all over the place. I mean, this is like the best, like any like, I'm sure he's disappointed because as a collector, yeah, these things are hard to find and you want lots of them. If you want to collect them and kind of corner the market, but like, I don't know, disappointment is all for show, I think, or mostly for show, because he's getting so much value out of this whole situation. All right, so that's a kind of a brief summary of what happened. I hope I wasn't telling everybody stuff they knew. But what has happened since this video proved that the case was garbage? Well, a few things have happened. One is that the guy who sold it to Logan Paul, his friend Matt Allen, has refunded the $3.5 million he received from Logan Paul. So Logan Paul is all set. He is, made whole. He's got absolutely zero loss on this. He's probably going to make $1 million or $2 million from the exposure and the coverage, if not like $10 or $20 million over the course of, 3, 4, 5 years, because all these people who don't know who the hell Logan Paul is now are going to have to go watch his video, and they might subscribe, or they might say, oh, well, I got to see what else this guy does. So Logan Paul's coming out gravy, and that's how it works in this world, folks. The rich get richer. Meanwhile, more typos here. This is not my finest work, and I really don't care. But Cartoon with this Jacob Gabe claims that he doesn't have the money, that the $2.7 million, of which his cut was like $2.1 million. The rest went to Mealy Pops, who got $550,000. But Jacob Gabe is saying suddenly, I guess he's lost $2.2 million. And people are quite suspicious about this guy, and deservedly so. You can't really spend $2.1 million in like the month or so that it took for this to go south. The Mealy Pops guy originally had said he was just going to refund Matt Allen, but now he apparently has gotten legal help and put the $550,000 he got from the sale into escrow until it's determined kind of whether he has a legal responsibility to pay back, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So I think there's a couple of pretty big questions here, right? One is, what about the original seller that was listing this case on eBay out of Canada? And the part of the reason why there was a lot of suspicion about this case from the very beginning is because the seller was known to have given several very different stories about where this case came from, right? Like I think at one time he said he found it in a house that he was doing work on. I can't remember if it was his house, but it was in an attic or something like that. And another time I think he said I can't remember what else, but like maybe like he got it from an employee or someone who worked for Wizards of the Coast or something like that. Point is, there were multiple stories he gave, and you would not be giving multiple totally different stories if you had, one legitimate answer to this question. So a lot of people were very suspicious of this guy, and I think, so what's going on here with this case is that somebody, gathered up some empty boxes of Pokemon First Edition, which, a million years ago were probably a lot easier to get than they are now. I bet now they would even sell for a few $1,000s, just an empty box. But they had these empty boxes, and basically they had some GI Joe cards to fill them up with. They cellophane wrapped them, very easy to do, with like $50 in supplies from anywhere, Amazon or eBay. They got a box that was roughly the same size, although one of the things people noticed that the box was the wrong kind of box or size, I guess, compared to other, first run Pokemon boosters cases. So that was a red flag, but, somebody somewhere basically assembled a counterfeit case, just like you would fake, a Tiffany diamond ring or a Prada bag or any other kind of thing that has a lot of value to it. If it's original and authentic, somebody, either by themselves or conspired with others to create a basically a product that was going to be used, that they certainly intended to use to defraud people. So, the big question I have is, let me just say this. I think everybody in the hobby has an opinion on this, and that's great. But I think I have to say, this issue kind of relates, at least the sort of what happens now stuff relates to my profession and what I do for a living, so I know quite a bit more than pretty much like 99.9% of the people that, opine on this issue. Now, I don't know anything about authenticating Pokemon stuff. I don't know, anything about these people that have been involved with this transaction and their integrity and so forth, right? So there's lots of people that know more about that stuff that have posted than me, and I'm grateful for that. But in terms of, like what happens from here, particularly with regard to BBCE and the people that were involved with the transaction, nobody is really all that clueful about the issues, and so I'll try to share with you some of my thoughts there. So the original seller, very well may have been the person that undertook this, this fraudulent, or this effort to defraud people. It may have been him. He that constructed this box, and that he knew he was selling it to somebody who had no idea it was fake, and he knew it was fake. And if that's true, that's a very significant crime. Now, I will say this: I don't know anything about Canadian law, but the actions that he took actually expose him to liability in the United States, because that's where the crime was committed. If you have sellers being defrauded in the United States, as was the case, because Card Cahoon, I believe, is in the United States, and I know Mealy Pops is. So if they were, duped into this situation from their homes in the United States, then that is a crime that has been committed in the United States, and U.S. authorities could certainly prosecute. They can prosecute, people anywhere. They can prosecute people who live anywhere in the world in the United States, but our system of justice generally requires that parties be present personally in order to be prosecuted. There's not a lot of ability to, prosecute people in absentia, as they say. you have to have the person, and so this is why oftentimes people like the guys that oh man, why can't I think of their names? But the WikiLeaks guy, and the guy who is in Russia, who was kind of a similar sort of dude that worked for the NSA and like took some of their information and released information on what they were doing. But those types of guys, right? Often there are lengthy battles over how the United States can get those people back into the United States to prosecute them for crimes. That process is called extradition, and basically the United States has treaties with most other countries about extradition and when and whether a party from one country can be moved to another party of a treaty in the event that there is a crime committed in the requesting party's country. So that's why, people kind of go to countries like Russia, because we don't really have great relations with them, and they're not going to allow for extradition of a lot of people, if any, nor are we going to extradite people that, there's lots of people that Russia would say have committed crimes against them, as would China, as would, most totalitarian states that have critics in the United States, like ex-former nationals of those countries often move to the United States and then become vocal, critics. And China and Russia and North Korea and Iran would all love to, get all those people back to prosecute them for crimes, but, not going to happen. So, Canada and the United States probably have pretty open rules on extradition, and it wouldn't be that hard to get somebody, but, these kinds of crimes against individuals are not like super high priority for the Department of Justice. Now, that $3.5 million is a pretty high number, but the kinds of things that they tend to focus on at the Department of Justice with regard to crimes against individuals would be things where there's sort of there's a very significantly sized and long-term criminal enterprise. And that's where you saw the FBI get involved maybe like a decade or more ago in the issue of sports-related autograph fraud. There were, millions and millions of dollars affecting, thousands and thousands of people that were a part of the crime boy. I wish I could remember the name of that too. It was like, there was an operation, something name for it, as there usually is for federal criminal investigations. Was it Operation Bullpen, I think, where they basically, indicted like several of the top auctioneers in the sports memorabilia marketplace, and discovered that like tons of like autographs for like Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle and the top signers were completely fake. So in any event, those are the kinds of cases that the Department of Justice may get involved with. They're typically not going to be super excited about a one-off attempt to defraud one or two people in the United States. So you can certainly make the authorities known about a crime that is committed that involves a violation of federal law, but your odds of getting closure on that are pretty long. However, most states have private rights of action for fraudulent activities, so you can sue somebody who has defrauded you if they caused you damage, and make yourself whole, and then get additional damages beyond that, and attorney's fees and other things. So people do sue each other for fraud. That gets a lot harder to do when you have somebody who's in Canada, who's committed the fraud, and you're in the United States. It doesn't mean it can't be done. It certainly can be done, but it is much more difficult, and it's not something you see every day. So if you have, like, if Logan Paul were the person suing, he certainly has the resources, and he certainly probably works with armies of lawyers right now, at least he should. And that case would likely be something he'd be interested in doing. You, on the other hand, look at the guys, Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops. Are they going to have the resources and wherewithal to go after a fraud case against a Canadian party who, by the way, may or may not have fled the country or state or province in which he lives and could be hard to pin down, along with his money. So, you've got Card Kahuna already saying, like, he doesn't have the money to repay the guy Matt, who bought it from Mealy Pops and Card Kahuna. So, is he going to be able to mount this pretty significant legal effort to go after the seller, who may or may not be on the lam? We'll find out. Certainly, if you find that seller, let's say they're a dentist or a doctor, there's somebody established in their community, they clearly have assets. They didn't just take the $70,000 and kind of flush it down the drain. Maybe you can go after them much more successfully than someone who's, a teenager who, is a runaway and can't be found and can never be served and blah, 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 right? But, that sort of reminds me that, like, that person is only going to be responsible for $70,000, right? They're only going to be, they can be responsible for attorney's fees and so forth, but in terms of actual damages, the seller is only is only theoretically liable for the $70,000 that they charged Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops. The bigger fish in this are certainly Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops, who are sitting on a ton of money that they got from the Matt guy. I have to refresh my memory on these names. So Matt Allen, right, paid $2.7 million to Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops, and they theoretically should have that money around to repay. And to the extent they're saying they can't or they won't, that's actually the bigger fight, right? Like, they can only get $70,000 out of the seller in Canada, if they're limited to actual damages, and they've got, $2.7 million of Matt Allen's money, and now Matt Allen is out, the 3.5 he got from Logan Paul, so that's like a net, zero. So basically he's out the $2.7 million that he paid for a totally worthless thing. And who's got that $2.7 million? It's not the guy in Canada, it's Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops. So the right result here is for Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops to give back the money that they got from Matt Allen for selling a counterfeit product. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. And then for Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops to, they deserve to be pissed off because they lost $2.7 million that they had in, basically profit. But, so what? It was not lawfully gained profit. Well, we'll talk about that, but they're the ones sitting on a big treasure right now, and the guy in Canada who sold for $70,000 certainly has liability, but he only made $70,000 from this, whereas Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops made $2.7 million. So let's talk about that a little bit. By the way, sorry for I know some people really like long videos, and if you're really interested in this, then I'm probably sharing things that maybe are interesting, or at least haven't been said. But let's talk about this a little bit. Excuse me. So Matt Allen, is out $2.7 million that he paid to Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops. Pardon me. I wish I had some water. I have none. That sucks. So Matt Allen has got this $2.7 million problem that he can't get his money back from Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops. Now, if Matt Allen were to sue Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops for that $2.7 million, what would that lawsuit look like, right? Well, we've talked about fraud, and certainly a fraud was committed somewhere, right? But what is fraud? Fraud is generally going to require that someone has an intent to deceive another person, and certainly the person that created this box had that intent, and presumably, benefited from that at some point. If it wasn't the original seller who made that box, then it was somebody who sold it to him, or so on down the line. But at some point, somebody, created this box and then sold it to another person and presumably profited from that, and that is certainly an actionable fraud case. However, the problem is you've got, parties who acquired this case who may or may not have known there were issues with it, and in fact, there's what should have been an objective third party in Baseball Card Exchange, who sort of blessed the case, and whose blessing theoretically, could mean that the parties who possessed the case at that point, had the knowledge or the expectation and belief that that the case was legitimate. So anything they did after that would seem to be, free from an intent to defraud anybody, because, they believed the case was real. BBCE believed the case was real and told them so. And as long as they didn't have, some other kind of maybe they had their own experts other than BBCE, and those experts said, "Oh, your case is junk. It's crap. It's not worth anything," And then they took that information and said, "Oh man, well, hey, let's submit this case to BBCE and see if they wrap it, because if they authenticate it and wrap it, then then we can say, oh yeah, it's a legit case, even though we know someone has told us it's a bunk, it's a garbage case, right?" So if that kind of shenanigans were going on, then certainly you have intention on the part of Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops to defraud another party, and perhaps to defraud BBCE. Now, did that kind of evidence, or did those facts exist? I think that's unlikely. I think it's more likely that Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops at most had maybe a suspicion that the case was faulty, but they felt like they would know for sure, if they sent it to BBCE, and maybe they get bad news from BBCE when Steve Hart looks at it, and they're willing to, spend the money to do that, but they might get good news, and it turns out it's authentic according to BBCE, and then they're golden. I think that's probably what their frame of mind was. So, if Matt Allen tries to sue Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops and can't demonstrate that they had knowledge of the case's counterfeit status, then Card Kahuna and Mealy Pops may have a defense based on that. Now, this is something that, by the way, all of this is just kind of off the top of my head. One can research these issues and get much more precise answers to questions. But one question I would want to sort of look into, if somebody asked me, "Oh, what's your opinion on this?" For who is really kind of in trouble here, and what are their odds of seeing a bad result? I would want to look at like basically what the law says about basically what's the word, like transactions that occur after an original fraud, where the later seller or party has no awareness of the fraud. So if you've got a I don't know, a counterfeit, like a counterfeit Tiffany ring, and you made that ring in your basement, it's made of plastic, and you sell it to somebody and that person has no idea, the person who bought it from you has no idea it's fake, and then they go sell it to another person, and maybe that person sells it to another person, and so on. Like, at what point, if ever, does the original fraud make or the distance from the original fraud make the person selling it not liable for fraud themselves? And there may be other kind of ways in which one could attack this, like from a legal perspective, like not through fraud, but through some other kind of claim. But I know that, like, if this were a stolen item, that ultimately the person who is the rightful owner of a stolen item, pretty much always has a right to get that back from whoever happens to possess it at the time. And then basically, the way that proceeds is everybody can kind of sue down the line, because it was a fraudulent conveyance of the product, basically, at every point after it was conveyed, without the rightful legal title or ownership of that item. So now that's a stolen item. I don't know how how it works with when you've got a counterfeit item that passes through many hands, and where the liability starts and stops. But the hobby industry, or industries where you have a lot of kind of there are a lot of issues with, like, how to determine whether something is legitimate or authentic or whatever else. There, I think, is an increasing expectation that parties buying and or selling in that field, do the appropriate due diligence to determine whether or not something is legitimate or authentic. So, it can be said that the seller who sells something has a duty of responsibility to determine that what they're selling is authentic and valid. And if it turns out they're not right about that, then they're responsible. It can also be said that the buyers of products like that have a responsibility to kind of do their homework, and if they buy things, then they do so at their own risk. And I think that's why the involvement of BBCE, who's supposed to be an objective third party, is so kind of troubling, is maybe the most troubling thing about this, because they theoretically could have prevented all this from happening just by being as much of an expert as the Poke Beach guys, and refusing to wrap this case, in which case the two guys who bought it for $70,000 would have just tried to get a refund, and that would have been that, right? But instead you've got now, multiple millions of dollars being lost by somebody because of that failure. And so it's the second question, big question I have, or that people have, is, what about BBCE? What happens to them? What, liability might they have? Well, I mean, the answer is probably not a ton. I mean, theoretically, you could argue, if you wanted to, that BBCE's negligence in authenticating this case caused damage to those who lost money because they relied on the expertise of BBCE, and therefore BBCE is legally responsible for the damage that was caused by that reliance, if it was reasonable. I don't know that we'll see anything like that, but that, I think, is the potential risk for baseball card exchange, is that damages that occur down the line because of something that they've done, if that something is negligence, that does open them up to liability. You can sue somebody for negligence that causes damage, financial or physical. So I think that's kind of what the concern is. If you're BBCE, at least from a strictly legal perspective, but I think perhaps more so the worry, both from the hobby and from BBCE, is that this will be looked at as an example of why you can't trust the work that BBCE does, and that everything that they've wrapped or authenticated to date, now suddenly is suspect because they screwed it up this one time. So how do we know they didn't screw it up other times? Well, I don't have an answer to that. I hope they haven't screwed up many other times. I know they have made errors. I mean, every authentication or grading company has made errors, and PSA makes tons of errors that are regularly talked about in the hobby. They frequently will slab trimmed cards, as not trimmed, and they do have a policy of trying to purchase those when they become aware of them, so that they can take them off the market. BBCE does not appear to have a policy requiring them to do that, and if they did, it would be a huge problem because they'd have to buy this case. So, in terms of their own kind of agreements with their customers, I think BBCE doesn't really have anything that would, suggest that they have to make the owner of any product that they authenticated whole if that product turns out to be inauthentic. The other issue I see coming up is well, what did BBCE get from this financially? And the answer is, I think that they have a max grading fee of $5,000. So if you send them a $20 million case of 1952 Topps baseball cards, and they authenticate it, it's not going to cost you some percentage of that value. It's going to max out at $5,000. So that's probably what was made by BBCE in reviewing and authenticating the original case here. Will that money be returned? Again, my understanding is the BBC's policy does not require them to return authentication fees in circumstances like this. But I have to say, I would imagine Steve probably would refund the amounts, just because he's a pretty straight shooter. I mean, if you don't know anything about Steve Hart, I would say he's one of the most liked and respected participants in the hobby, and I think a lot of people really feel pretty sad that this has happened, because I think it demonstrably is an example of Steve's mistake. In this case, he authenticated something that should not have been authenticated, and the question is, what should he have done so that this would not have been authenticated? And there are answers, right? He could have known more about the label that was on the case. he could have done more kind of research about, the box sizes and the tape on them. In short, he could have, he could have obtained the kind of information that Poke Beach or other people like the author of the article on Poke Beach, have in their possession, because they've been in the kind of unopened Pokemon business for a long time, right? Instead, if you watch that video where they open up the case to see what's inside, Steve explains how he authenticated that case, and basically the answer was like, well, you could see that the tape on the case had been there for quite some time, as had the label. So his point was that the label and the tape seemed to, have been on the case for quite some time, which suggests, right, that case has been around a while, presumably since that product, which it was originally made. And that was sort of the end of the inquiry from his perspective. I think it's pretty obvious that inquiry is insufficient, that you have to look at that label, and like the font on that label was wrong. And not like in a major way, but just a little bit off, right? And then, the serial number, the UPC code on there was, thought to be wrong as well. And the problem Steve has with something like this is, I believe there are no known examples of first edition cases. There are only examples of first run cases for which there are images or past examples. So it's like, even if Steve had suspicions about the labeling and the tape that was on the box, he didn't have any one-to-one examples to which he could compare to see if there was a variance. So he was kind of like stuck. But I mean, that's the sort of situation where I think you have to be very conservative if you're in the business of authenticating products. You have to err on the side of caution. You have to say, boy, given the value of this thing, and given the fact that we don't have examples, and given the fact that what he should really have is the information that was on Poke Beach in his head, and given the issues raised by Poke Beach, all of that would mean can't authenticate this case, no way. And I have gotten stuff rejected by Steve Hart, just like packs within a box I sent him, were unwrapped, like the seal came off, and so he couldn't wrap the box, things like that. And everybody who has sealed stuff authenticated by BBCE, has had that experience. So Steve does, he does do his, I think, diligence on the kinds of products that I have seen him authenticate personally. I think this is an example of him just not having the information and not having the the resources available to be authenticating a particular type of product, and then authenticating it anyways. And that's a discredit to Steve for sure. But my hope would be that that's a kind of 1 in a million example of something that is very unlikely to happen again, and that it's something that causes BBCE to really change how they do business to get better. And they've already stopped. I guess I didn't put this up on a slide or anything, but they have stopped doing any authentication of Pokemon cases. They already don't do any Pokemon boxes because they're factory wrapped. But that's certainly I think necessary step. And then the question is, what are they going to do in the future, so that they have the information and expertise that they need? Maybe they're going to hire somebody who brings that expertise. Maybe they're going to, charge a lot more for Pokemon cases so they can spend the extra time gathering necessary information. Any number of things are possible, and I don't know what's best, but something certainly has to be done to, I think, address what's gone on here. Let's see what else. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of people are talking, about or asking, does this situation create a loss in value for BBCE authenticated products? And the answer is, maybe. I think the consensus I see is that, people think it's not really going to affect the authentication work that they do on sports stuff, because that's a place where Steve Hart has, easily the most experience out of anybody else in the world that at least is in the business on authenticating and, determining whether boxes, packs of vintage baseball cards and basketball cards and football cards are, legitimate or not. So doesn't seem like many people are gonna, jump ship because of what's happened here with regard to their vintage sports stuff. And he didn't really do a whole lot of Pokemon stuff. So if somebody has a Pokemon case, like maybe a more recent case, wrapped by him, yeah, I think that maybe goes down a little bit in value, or the number of people interested in buying that goes down. So auction prices are gonna, drop down. But I actually think a lot of modern cases of whether it's Pokemon or Panini basketball or Topps stuff, a lot of modern unopened cases are not currently wrapped by BBCE because they're expensive to send to him, and for whatever reason it's just not something that's expected. People generally kind of trust their ability to determine if a case that they buy off eBay or wherever has the tape intact, and they can return it if it looks weird. So yeah, wrapping cases is not a thing that happens all that often. It becomes very important when you've got a very big dollar case, as here. So maybe it's maybe part of the solution here is for BBCE to raise the price that they charge for authenticating cases, so they can do a lot more investigation, spend more time. I don't really know, but all right, well, that's the show. That's the end of the slideshow. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Yeah, I'll think about using slideshows in some of my channels. Maybe not this one too much, but in other channels where I don't have something to kind of go on camera. But thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. We'll catch y'all later. You have a great one. Bye now.